Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our session of Women in Crypto presented by Chainalysis. I'm Amanda Wick, and I'm the Chief of Legal Affairs here at Chainalysis. I'd like to introduce you to the three brilliant women who are joining me today. Sigal Mandelker is the General Partner at Ribbit Capital. Lucy Gazmararian is the Founder and Managing Partner at Token Bay Capital. And Alana Palmedo is the Partner and Chief Operating Officer at Paradigm. We also want to introduce Chainalysis to you if you don't know us. We are the blockchain analysis company. We provide data, software, services, and research to government agencies, exchanges, financial institutions, and insurance and cybersecurity companies in over 50 countries. Our data platform powers investigations, compliance, and risk management tools that have been used to solve some of the world's most high-profile cyber criminal cases and grow consumer access to cryptocurrency safely. We'll have a brief question and answer session at the end, so please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A area during our discussion, and we'll try to get them at the end. Please note that all of the views expressed by the speakers are their own. Also, they may not be able to answer certain questions depending on their regulatory status. I'll let them address that. So if your question isn't addressed, pardon us, but there's probably some reasons. So without further ado, I just want to jump into introductions. So excited to have you guys, and thank you. I know it's very different time zones for some of you. I think two of you are in the West Coast, and Lucy, I think you're in Hong Kong. So thank you to all of you and everybody who's tuning in. Let's just jump right in with, can you tell everyone, how did you get into venture capital? I'm going to just go around in like a wheel. So Lucy, you're in my bottom right. How about we start with you? What brought you into venture capital? And if it's different, what brought you into crypto?
Great. Yes. So good morning, everyone. So my venture capital journey is actually relatively new. So I'm guessing that it's newer than Alana and Sigal. So I set up recently my own venture capital fund. We are an early stage venture capital fund based in Hong Kong, and it's focused on digital assets and blockchain companies. Actually, it follows a journey from moving into digital assets more broadly. So we can come on to talk about that. But yeah, so my VC journey is pretty new. It came about, happy to share more as we go along. I don't want to give a monologue to kick off with.
No, I think that's awesome. So you were in digital assets and then got into virtual currency, essentially. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Exactly. Alana, what about you? How did you get into venture capital? And if it was different, how did you get into crypto?
Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me, Amanda. For me, it was entirely by accident. I really wanted to surround myself with people who were smarter than me. And then I met Matt Huang, one of our co-founders at Paradigm, and I stopped my search. I think for me, I've always been passionate about investing. I spent many years before getting into venture in traditional investing markets, primarily public equities. And it's just become a passion. I'm super excited about the power law of compounding returns and the puzzle or challenge that investing presents. And venture really just came upon me when I met Matt. And I think finding amazing people is such a rarity. And so I just jumped on the opportunity.
I think it's so interesting. So what were you doing immediately before you were in venture capital?
Immediately before, I was working for Boston University's endowment. So we were managing the university's assets. And I actually did some investing into venture funds, doing manager diligence. And then prior to that, I worked at the Gates Investment Office, also as an analyst.
Oh, so interesting. So am I fair in saying, Lucy and you so far, investment banking backgrounds-ish that then transferred into a more blockchain crypto space?
Yeah, from my perspective, so I was in traditional financial markets for almost 16 years with Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Kleinwort Benson. Traditional finance was interesting. And actually in the years that I was doing it, it was actually pretty cutting edge. And now we sort of call it traditional finance. Now we actually call fintech traditional. You've got traditional finance, traditional fintech, and then what I call is the cutting edge of finance, which is DeFi and digital assets. So actually my journey has rotated quite naturally through those waves of innovation, if you like. And I think that's important grounding. For me, crypto and digital assets, the financial services element of it is a pretty big piece. And so to have that background and that understanding and that appreciation for markets and how digital assets and crypto is going to improve upon that structure is actually really interesting. I also come from an asset management background, so in terms of managing funds, if you like, and again, sort of bringing that together with crypto and digital assets and that skill set from my past life.
So I think that's interesting. So the two of you kind of share something in common, but Sigal, your path to venture capital and crypto was a little different. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. And I should say good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone who's dialing in. So I would say mine was a very different path and much less traditional, although I think there's actually an increasing number of people with my background who are going into this space. But before I was at I've only also been in this field for about a year. And before I was at Ribbit, I was at the Treasury Department. I've spent my whole career in and out of the government, most recently as the Undersecretary of Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. And when I was in that job, the job was very much a global job. So I was traveling all over the world, meeting with all kinds of different senior government officials, with CEOs of banks, among others. And it became increasingly clear to me, particularly when I would travel in the developing world, emerging markets, that a lot of US financial institutions had, for various reasons, de-risked from those regions. And I would get all kinds of questions about, like, how can you help us get access to US correspondent banking? And of course, we could help those governments, but we didn't have the authority to tell a bank to go into a particular space. And I ultimately came to the conclusion that if we really wanted to have more of those kinds of companies providing a greater range of financial services to people all over the world, and also in places in the United States where people don't have terrific access to financial services, it was going to have to be through fintech, and I put fintech, I should say, and crypto. And so when I left Treasury, I really set out to think about, well, how, and I became very passionate about this particular point. So I just set out to figure out how could I marry that interest with the next stage of my career. And I was fortunate enough to be able to talk to a lot of different people. And then along the way, I met the founder of our firm, and we just had a great conversation about it. And then I started to meet more people here, and we and they'd been looking for someone with my background. And a year later, here I am. And it's been super interesting and exciting and great to be able to go down just a completely different path from what I was doing before.
I love all of the journeys of how you guys got here. When we were talking about putting together this panel internally at Chainalysis, a few of us were talking, and I said, well, I'd love to have these three fantastic women in venture capital. And one of them said, okay, I'm embarrassed to ask this, but what do venture capitalists actually do? And I was like, that's a great question. And it's going to be like our first one. So I think, the perception versus the reality of the job. And I'm not saying like on a day-to-day basis, tell us your calendar from 9 to 5. But if you kind of had to describe like what you guys how you would describe like what you do or what your role is, I think people kind of generally know like, oh, we fund things. But if you could kind of give like maybe detail or maybe your role is different, I think people are kind of curious, like, what does a venture capitalist like really do? I'll go counterclockwise this time. So Sigal, let me go back to you.
So we do all kinds of different things. One, of course, we spend a lot of time meeting with founders and getting to know new companies and getting a sense for what might be a great fit to invest in a particular company and group of entrepreneurs. We spend a lot of time helping our companies. Once we've invested, I have the great opportunity to work a lot, for example, with Chainalysis. So we try to provide whatever help, advice, guidance that we can. I also I spend a lot of my time thinking about, because I do have a regulatory background, thinking about, how a changing regulatory, we should be thinking about investments given the changing regulatory environment. And I also spend a decent amount of my time helping to sort of bridge the conversation between this space and how policymakers kind of understand and think about. And I worked with a lot of other companies in that regard too.
So it sounds like, is it fair to say that a lot of your role is a lot of advising in terms of founders, companies, kind of like
part of it?
Yeah.
Part of it. And then of course we do a lot of research and thinking and thesis development and about what dreaming about what the future of finance is, right? That's a big part, I think, of what we get to do in this space, which is so interesting and cutting edge.
Alana, is your role similar, or would you say it's different, or it's pretty comparable?
Well, I would say what our organizations are set out to do is quite similar. And it's funny that you say, you know that we're providing capital and investing in these businesses. I think one of our goals is to make sure that we're not simply investing capital, but we're also users of the technology and partners of our businesses. And so that means really operationally integrating ourselves into crypto. Much like what Sigal just said, we try to partner with our portfolio companies closely and help and guide them, whether that be technical or operational support along the way, policy, regulatory issues that come up. And in a lot of cases, we're not just an investor, but we can also be a customer. And so we may offer product feedback and help them brainstorm as they're thinking through the next phase of development or growth. And then, as the chief operating officer, I would say that managing a crypto investment portfolio is not always so straightforward. And so much of what we're doing is chartering new territory and figuring out what best in class looks like and how to set really strong controls and practices operationally for the firm.
Lucy, what about you? Anything different, or they've said it all?
I think I would just bring up two things. I think something to consider is the stage that, the stage of venture capital. If you're a very mature venture capital, you're a larger fund, or you're looking at very early stage newer projects, it's going to then depend on what your role is and how you're interacting with companies. And also, what stage you're at in the VC journey. Are you just raising a new fund? Are you doing fundraising? Are you, getting in the new deals? So I think it depends on the level of maturity of the venture capital business, and they can vary quite wildly, right, from the early stage funds to the later stage funds, and that dictates the size of the team. It really impacts everything, and there's a whole range out there. But I would say, primary focus and the reason why we exist is to be helping the portfolio companies and the entrepreneurs that we believe in. And certainly from my journey, working with all the crypto entrepreneurs from PwC side and helping them from a huge network like that with, tax, accounting, legal, regulatory, how to expand their global footprint, and then branching out and setting up my own fund. A lot of those skills are still being transferred, right? Because that's what startups need. They're companies at the end of the day. So they need that support and that guidance. And I would say another really large piece of it is facilitating introductions, joining the dots, and generally being like a big champion for a company. So it's a fantastic role. I think it's the best role in the world, really. If you enjoy helping people and watching teams grow and flourish, it's the best job in the world.
See, I'm going to tell my colleague that was a great question, because all three of you had tons more answers than just funding new companies. So that I told her that was a really good question. So I guess some of the things that people really want to know in terms of venture capital are, what are some exciting areas in crypto investment? Like in terms of, I think Alana, you alluded to this, like projects you see of being of interest in the future. Like you guys are kind of like, I think Sigal, you said like shaping the future of finance. I know some of you may not be able to get into exact details, but just things that are kind of like things that you're excited about or that you see on the horizon. And this time, Alana, you turned off your mic, so you get to go first.
Okay, sounds good. So, I think without going into too much detail, there's so many areas that are exciting, and so it's really quite hard to choose. But for me, I think that decentralized finance, DeFi, is by far one of the most exciting developments that has taken place over the last 2 years. And for me, I think that's personal because I witnessed the 2008 financial crisis. I worked through it at an organization that did a lot of active trading. And there were so many points during that crisis that our financial system just did not have best-in-class architecture and financial systems to manage and provide the transparency for people to really be able to manage through that quickly, easily. And so witnessing that firsthand, for me, like DeFi presents so many amazing opportunities for open, permissionless, transparent nature of transactions and information to be collected in a fast, reliable, secure manner. So that would be my one if I had to choose.
All right. Well, Lucy, now that Alana has taken DeFi, what are you excited? I have a feeling I feel like Alana took the good one, but I'm sure there are other things to be excited about.
There are so many things to be excited about. I'm excited about, tokens versus equity. So what's unique about, the fund that I've structured, while it's regulated by the SFC, it's a time where I'm investing in both token sales and, equity rounds. And that's super exciting, right? How you're combining that, how you're looking at the two different sources of value, where's that accruing for a company? So, that concept in itself is sort of symbolic of the transition happening, right, to a token economy. So I find that just sort of top level really, really interesting and also when I'm looking at a company and they issue a token, how we structure that deal. But I think broadly, listen, I split the world out into 5 different digital asset verticals. So I'm looking at the infrastructure layer, that's the blockchain services, identity management, oracles, all the building blocks. That's really exciting. And then off that infrastructure layer, I look at financial services, all the innovation happening there, DeFi as well, NFTs, let's not forget those, and social tokens, which I'm really, really excited about actually. And I think that's going to be huge. So those are the sort of 5 main areas of disruption I see. So if Alana's taken DeFi, I think NFTs, listen, for me, when I'm looking because I have a framework where I'm, comparing, if you like, the innovation in those 5 digital asset verticals, it's really interesting to see what happens when you take out regulation and you take out the regulatory framework and how fast the innovation can spiral and, just completely proliferate. And that's what's happened with DeFi and NFTs. And then you look at sort of tokenizing financial securities like security tokens, and you see how much slower it is, even though the underlying technology is the same in many respects. So it's incredible actually to see that. But I think, eventually it's all going to sort of, I think regulation is moving to DeFi. So while it's been, the frontier and cutting edge and cowboy of financial services, I think, with recent guidance, we're going to see a nice merging of CeFi and DeFi, and just how this whole infrastructure layer for financial services is going to build out. So that's a really long way of saying many different aspects and comparing them. I think comparing them, it's really interesting.
I think it's funny that you didn't even know you were answering the first question that we got in the Q&A in terms of how are VCs thinking about non-crypto blockchain tech like NFTs? Are these far-fetched, or are VCs exploring such innovations? And it sounds like the answer is you absolutely are. So that's awesome. And there's so much in what you said that I want to come back to. But Sigal, I definitely want to hear from you. What are you excited about, or what things you're seeing in terms of projects on the horizon?
So I'm going to try not to repeat Alana and Lucy's fabulous answers because I agree with
they were good.
But actually, from my background, what's super exciting is, we're investors, very proud investors in Chainalysis. And I think that there's just this fascinating ecosystem that we have in crypto that you don't have in traditional banking, that Chainalysis is, companies like Chainalysis are able to use. So if you're, if you've lived in the world of anti-money laundering, just as an example, traditionally, you've had to sort through mounds and mounds of banking data from a variety of different banks and try to meld them together and try to put a picture out there, which can take time. It's often retroactive. When you look at what a company like Chainalysis is able to do, where you can see it all out there, real time, looking for illicit activity, and you realize that actually blockchain technology provides this. This is not the narrative out there, and we need to change it, because blockchain technology provides this incredible avenue to be able to quickly trace bad activity to the bad actors, which then allows even more space for incredible innovation to thrive. I also think more broadly, we're still in the very early stages of crypto, right? I don't remember what the full number is, but there's something like 100 to 200 million people in the world today who have dipped their toes into crypto. And I think that's just going to continue to grow by leaps and bounds, as this technology is going to enable more and more people to get access to a wider variety of products, ranging from financial services to NFTs to the full scale of things that blockchain technology can provide. And so we've spent a lot of time also thinking about that infrastructure, custody, trading, et cetera. And there's really fascinating companies that are doing things in just completely different ways from what we've seen in traditional finance for years.
I am obviously biased towards your answer in favor of blockchain analytics companies. So on that one, I will +1 that. And then I'll just flip it and say, those are the things you were excited about. Are there any things that you're concerned about? Regulation, uncertainty, kind of things that you see on the horizon that I don't want to say worry you, but maybe concern is slightly less strong. And Sigal, I'll come back to you, especially given your background in regulation, just things that you're kind of and domestically, globally, just throw it out there. Anything keep you up at night?
Yeah, look, I would say I think there is a great need for a lot more clarity, right, on the regulatory side. We tried to provide that when I was at Treasury, but there's a long way to go. And the only way we're going to get even more clarity again, so innovation can grow and thrive in a very safe space, is if there's a meeting of the minds between the regulators and the innovators, right? The fact of the matter is, most people in the government don't understand crypto. They don't know what it's for. They don't know how to use it. And when that's the case, you tend to see, an instinct to put something that may look fundamentally different into the same boxes that have been tried and tested for many, many years. So you look, for example, this is not just to crypto. This is kind of I think this is across the board with financial institutions. When I was at Treasury, I used to always say that the Bank Secrecy Act was stood up at the time when we were still using the rotary phone. And I just actually found out something super interesting about the rotary phone, which is the way, at least in the United States, the way that area codes were developed was by density of population. So New York City is 212. You have tons of people with 212, so it takes less time, manual time and effort to get to 212, right? That's when these rules were stood up.
I have no idea. I feel like this whole conversation was worth that nugget alone, just to understand random area codes, not so random.
Yeah, exactly. So similarly, right? We're in such a different place. Who even remembers phone numbers anymore? You don't have to. You can just click on it. You can just click on a name. And so what we really need to do is take a serious look. I think what regulators need to do, I think a lot of them are thinking this through, is to take a serious look at what the technology actually does, how different it is from existing, something that's more traditional, and then think through how do you regulate in such a way that you, whether it's illicit activity or anything else, such that you effectively drive out the illicit activity while at the same time incentivizing innovation to happen in your own countries, and also, just as important, bring a greater number of people into the financial ecosystem. So that's something that I think should be actually super exciting for people in industry and regulators to get together, think through, develop new solutions. Until that happens, I think we're going to continue to be in a place all over the world, right, where the regulation doesn't necessarily solve the problem or fit, and you're just going to sort of see things grow in a lot of different ways. So that's my optimism for the future, is that those conversations can get more and more sophisticated, and that we can really help grow what's so exciting about this technology in fundamentally different ways that everybody can feel much more comfortable with than I think a lot of regulators do today.
So the short answer is you're not that worried about much. That's awesome. That's good news.
I worry all the
time. but I am intrigued. You make a good point, right? Like that's definitely on the US side. Lucy, I'd love to get your take. You're in Hong Kong.
Too.
Yeah, it's a very global issue, and you're keyed in all throughout probably the world, but definitely, like, if I can pick on you, can I talk about like Southeast, well, Asia just in general, the APAC region, tons going on there. Anything worrying or concerning you other than the news?
Listen, I think regulation and regulatory arbitrage, if you like, has been a feature of crypto from day one. And that's not disappearing, it's just matured. And the different regulators around the world have accumulated knowledge at different rates. And in slightly different ways, although, there are bodies like IOSCO that is actually bringing everyone together and realizes that certain international standards need to be set if we're talking about global financial markets. I mean, just by virtue of the fact that we're so interconnected, the existing financial system is, I think, it doesn't take too much brain power to realize, some level of coordination is needed. And they're definitely doing that, right? I've done my crypto speeches at IOSCO's annual meeting, and everyone gets together. It is incredible, all the different countries, everybody wants to learn from other regulators. There's a lot of really interesting dialogue, driven by this kind of deep-rooted, fear of not knowing enough. I think what's going to be, and I remember when I said this about 3 years ago to a room full of regulators, and I said, you guys are going to need to, be regulating the code. Like, you guys are going to need to be tech teams too. And they sort of looked at me as if, who is this crazy woman, standing up and telling us this? Because it was so far removed from the everyday role of a regulator. It was sort of, so paper-based, so desk-based, that sort of stretch to being so tech-driven was really far. But I think in 3 years, that's completely transformed. I think it's probably, I'm not inside, the runnings of a regulator, but I'm pretty sure that conversation is being held. Like, how are you going to start monitoring this new activity if you're not also online and have tech capabilities in-house? So I think, it's really shifted. It's definitely been a mindset shift in the last few years, which is really welcome. And, even if you're just looking at the fact that they're all going to upgrade money onto a blockchain with central bank digital currencies, the knock-on effect that you're going to have your money, everyday money, operating on the same infrastructure, there's a very small step to the impact on the whole digital economy and what it means to be a regulator in this new digital economy. And I think it's a super exciting time. So actually, I've never been more positive about it all. Bring it down a little bit to where I sit in Hong Kong. As I say, my fund is regulated, and the SFC came out in 2018, allowing portfolio managers to allocate 10% of the fund's assets into virtual assets. And that spans all virtual assets. So security tokens, cryptocurrencies, utility tokens. And that was really interesting and very forward thinking. So in Hong Kong particularly, there's a really deep-rooted desire to make sure that Hong Kong as an international finance hub and that status is maintained, and that needs to be maintained by transferring financial securities onto blockchain infrastructure, which is just basically an upgrade. And also we have China's airdropping their new digital yuan, just across the boundary here with Shenzhen. So, it's all coming together really nicely. And I think, we're coming to a watershed moment where everybody's on board, and we're about to have a tidal wave of innovation take off in actually quite a responsible way, I would say.
Let me just ask you, only because we're on the topic, do you know if folks are working on cross-border international regulation solutions to handle these big stops? One of our viewers is in Australia, and China is our big trading partner. And since you were kind of right on that topic, it just seemed like a good moment to kind of throw it in there.
Yeah, I mean, I actually personally worked on the HKMA, so the Monetary Authority in Hong Kong. I worked on a project they had working with the Bank of Thailand on a cross-border digital currency. That's now been extended to include the Central Bank of the UAE and the PBOC. So suddenly you've got multi-currency cross-border projects. And, part of the dialogue and part of the brainstorming when we're going through these, building these prototypes is how you cater to different regulation in different jurisdictions, particularly when certain currencies have capital controls, right? The yuan is not a freely convertible currency. So how do you code that in? How do you respect the different restrictions of different countries? And actually, what's really interesting is this technology can do it perfectly, right? Because you just customize it. It's so much easier actually to monitor everything. So even if there are differences in the regulation, it's just about coding it in and making things respect those different laws. You actually have far more control over the flow of your currency with this new technology than you did before. It's more transparent, it's very visible, you mint and you burn tokens. I mean, the central banks are now doing this. It's not just the companies doing it, and crypto companies. So I think, it's a really promising time, and there's a lot of dialogue happening. Listen, the Bank for International Settlements is the bank of central banks. And I mean, for a start, it's an incredible resource if anyone's interested in the space to go on the BIS website. But, they're having meetings all the time. This isn't happening in a vacuum. Everybody is communicating and pushing the technology forwards.
So we obviously, this series is Women in Crypto, and we kind of ask this question, and I always like to get people's thoughts. But looking at the sector of venture capital, I'm curious, what have you guys experienced specifically in your sector in terms of the number of women in crypto? Different, same? I know some of you have been in other fields coming from traditional finance or government. Sigal, I'll start with you.
So I've met a number of phenomenal women in crypto. And I think actually the last panel you had, Amanda, was a great testament to that, where you had fabulous women from Treasury, the Justice Department.
The US Gov Group, we called it.
US Gov Group, exactly. I mean, my experience, right, let's say from Treasury, and now I'm also moving in to this space, but is that they're just incredible women who are doing really amazing work. You can just, again, with the U.S. government, you can just look across the field. There just really are, I like to say, just a lot of kick-ass women in crypto, and I see it at a lot of our companies too. So I've always been, in fields where that tended to be more male dominated, but here at Ribbit, we're close to 50, we're something like 50-50. So it's great to see that.
Yeah. And that's not normal numbers for venture capital. I think I read somewhere where less than 7% of venture capitalists are women. So overall, there doesn't tend to be a lot. Do you see, does it feel like there's more or less in crypto, or is it not noticeable? Alana, Lucy, I don't know if you guys have thoughts, curious. I know, Lucy, you're 100% female at your firm. I would boast that with pride. As long as you could say a 100% female venture capital firm. And that's a somewhat inside joke, because I think you're an army of one right now, right? I'm teasing. But just curious, like your experiences in terms of like noticeably different. I know Alana and Lucy, you guys come from more traditional finance backgrounds. Maybe it wasn't that much of a different and it's just a finance issue in general. I'm kind of curious, like your experiences, is there a women in venture capital issue or are we good?
I think it's a really hard question to answer. I mean, in my career, I think like Sigal, I've worked in some industries that tended to be more male dominated. But I've also worked with some incredible women along the way, including, the chief investment officer at the Boston University Endowment, Lila Hunnewell, who was just a fantastic mentor to me. And, I was thinking about this, and I guess my general sense is that would I love to have more women in crypto and more women in venture capital? Absolutely. And, is it really that unusual, the current ratios? I'm not sure. I think that the same problem persists in a lot of industries. And so my sense is that this is, we can always get better, and it would be great to see more women coming forward and having these careers. But, I think that we also have, like, Sigal at Ribbit, they have, 50% women. That's amazing. And I don't know if you would have seen that 10 years ago. So I feel like we're making really good progress.
Well, and you kind of gave me a lead in, and I'll just say for folks that are raising your hand, please don't hesitate to throw your questions in the chat and we will definitely try to get to them. But I definitely want to touch on what Alana said. We'd all like to kind of like see more women in the space, especially women who are interested. Do you have anyone have thoughts on kind of like what can we do to promote more diversity? Not necessarily just in venture capital, but in like the broader crypto blockchain system. I'm not asking you to solve it, just thoughts. I know we're not going to solve it today.
I mean, I think it's also on the subconscious level. I think, the funniest moment, I won't name which company, but I saw a big banner. It was a huge conference. It was a big deal. And they had this picture to showcase the conference. And it was all these little round circles of all these faces. And it was just like 30 men. And I never normally notice it. And I actually was just like, oh my goodness, it was actually creepy. It was like literally male army, and then one female speaker. It was really bizarre, and I was like, wow, I'm sure those 30 men, that's not the intention. Like, they were not trying to achieve that effect, and it's just not even realizing the messaging, the subconscious messaging that we're putting out there. And I'm not a psychologist, but I think there's a lot of that goes on, right? Is what you're absorbing without realizing. And I think a lot of it is just, calling people out and just saying, look, you may not have realized this, but this is the message it gives. And as women, we may not realize, but when we see something like that, we don't think we have a role in that conference. Like, that's not screaming, come and join us and be part of this. It's actually just, you just think you're not welcome. But again, the intention is not that. So I think it's just sort of being conscious. It's not being militant about it. I think everyone should just sort of, I don't like being too aggressive about it, but it's just like saying, hey, look, did you realize there's not one single female face there, and maybe, a little bit of balance would help. And the other thing that I think is really important is to have female role models, again, in the same sort of subconscious. But if you've got women on podiums that are actually representing the space, it naturally makes you think you can do it too, and you can be part of it, and how can you get involved? But if it's only men standing on podiums and men are the role models, then the younger girls are not going to come through, and they're not going to be inspired. So I think, marketing and visibility of women in the space is really, really vital, and it shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. It's one of the reasons why we started this series, because sometimes it's just putting the names out there to make sure that people know there are women who are doing this. They are amazing. You should be calling on them too, and not just having 30 men and one woman. If there's just no reason why it has to be that. There are perfectly capable, as Sigal said, kick-ass women. And I got approval. There's no rating on this, so we can say kick-ass. But Sigal, what about you? Anything, your thoughts in terms, I know you're super active in this area and you do a lot, but I'd love to just hear your thoughts in terms of things that we can do to improve.
Look, I think that it's in any space, right? You, as Lucy said, like it's super important to have role models, people to look up to, people you can reach up to. I think, I fundamentally believe that let's say in crypto, there's so much for people to get excited about, men and women. But when you think about like all the people who traditionally have been excluded by the financial system, where this gives them all kinds of different opportunities. You think like, crypto or fintech more broadly, that like the remittance space is just being fundamental, there's just such fundamental change that's happening there. The ability to send money back home all over the world. There's just a lot of things that people can get really passionate about in this space. And we need to get the message out, what's so interesting and exciting and should be, and should be really appealing. I'm also just a huge believer in mentorship, right? So I've been, throughout my career, the beneficiary of having incredible mentors, and now I do the same, and I encourage, as mentoring other people, and I really encourage women to reach out to somebody who might be able to serve in that kind of a role for them. I recently had somebody who I'm just getting to know, who's in venture too, at a completely different firm, and she said to me, "Look, I really want a female mentor. Will you serve? Will you be that person for me?" And of course, I was thrilled and said yes. So I think some of it's the role model, it's mentorship, it's leading by example. I like to tell the story how when I was at Treasury, 3 out of 5 of my managers were women, including me. And before I got into that role, it had only ever been 1. And of course, it was 3 out of, the other 2 were there because they were the best people for those positions. But you saw during the course of my tenure, like an increasing number of women were promoted into those kinds of roles. And I think it sort of takes that, kind of leadership by examples that then encourages folks to get into a field, or seek new and different opportunities. So that's not unique to any particular field or industry. I just think it's something that's really important to do across the board.
Well, I think, if I can pick a couple of things out, because it sounds like both you and Alana had really great mentors. And I think people kind of recognize the importance of mentorship. I think you kind of noted like the importance of being proactive. I think probably not enough women ask people, will you be my mentor? It doesn't have to come with a corsage or anything, but it's an awkward question, right? To kind of like ask and be like, will you do this for me? I will say, and I got permission from Sigal because she doesn't talk about this, but Sigal is an amazing example of sponsorship versus mentorship, like taking that extra step. Like I have friends that I know who have their positions like very qualified, unquestionably, but might not have even known about the job, might not have even applied, might not have even had the chutzpah to think they were capable of it if Sigal hadn't sponsored them and kind of helped them. And I think taking that step is super critical. So she let me give her a shout out because she doesn't toot her own horn enough, and I specifically asked permission. But I think I'm actually seeing some questions in the chat, and we had this question beforehand. It's not for lack of interest. I think women are very interested in getting into the field of venture capital. I guess the question I would have for you guys is, what advice do you have for anyone who would want to get into this? Are there paths that you would suggest or skills that you think are useful? Just like, if you could tell, well, maybe not your younger self, but if a younger woman was coming to you today and saying, I really want to get into venture capital, advice that you would give her. And Lucy, since your mic is ready to go, I'm going to go to you first, and then Alana, you're on deck.
I actually had this. I think it's easier for me to describe my journey into just traditional finance into Goldman Sachs as a wide-eyed sort of innocent analyst. And I tell you what was strange about it, and this is definitely a message I want to get out there, is I studied history. I studied history at Oxford. It's a very UK thing where we just study what we have a deep interest in, and then we get jobs that have absolutely nothing to do with our degree, which I actually think is a really great thing, because for me, it's about sort of pushing the mind and stimulating the mind in whichever way, whichever subject you like. But that being said, I was always very heavy on the arts. And so for me, because I was a historian, I never even considered getting into banking. And I got into banking by it was something that just didn't enter my mind as a career, because I didn't do economics, I didn't do, maths. And it happened by chance. And when I got into banking, I realized there are so many different roles and skill sets, even though it's within a financial institution. And I think that's the message that I want to get across. It's that just because it's a venture capital firm or it's a bank, it doesn't mean that there aren't roles in those organizations that will suit your skill set, because it's just about skill sets. And even those types of sort of finance or crypto businesses still need communications, it still needs analysis, it still needs applying your mind. And really, if you just boil down what your skill set is, you can apply it to any industry. It can be, a fashion house. It can be, and by the way, you've got all the finance people in the fashion houses. You can apply it to a bank, and you can apply it to VC. So I would say be aware of like what you like doing. And then if there's an industry that you want to break into, marry that skill set with open roles in those places, because all of those companies will need a whole range of different skill sets. It's not just algo traders and computer scientists in these organizations. So that would be the first thing I would say. And actually really important, like don't just not explore something because you think that you don't fit, because it's really not the case.
That's such a great answer. Alana, what about you in terms of like, what advice would you give somebody thinking of going into venture capital?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think so many women that I've spoken to, and actually men too, feel, especially earlier in their careers, that they need to take these very intentional steps to make sure that they're working towards their ultimate goal in their career. And I think if there's one thing that I would articulate, it's actually that you should approach your career, like Lucy said, much more from a what are you interested in, and be open-minded and exploratory, because so often, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Maybe I still don't know. I'm still figuring that out, right? And I think you don't close doors along the way. I think you open them. And so I would just encourage, women who are interested in the space to, think about starting a company or learning about finance, read a lot, be curious, but most importantly, be open-minded to the idea that the path forward is going to be a really fulfilling one. And I think that having that attitude really changes the way that you think about career decisions along the way.
Sigal, I know those are two tough ones to follow, but anything that you want to offer in terms of advice for people thinking of going into venture capital?
I think
or who want to.
Yeah, I just love those. I love both of those. I love both of those answers, to be honest with you. And again, look at us, the three of us, we all followed very different paths to get to where we are. So, so be open and, just, I always say in general, figure out what you think you're really passionate about doing in life, and then go and pursue it, and don't take yourself out of a possibility because you might not have had a more traditional path to get into the investment space. Because look at this group. We've all really had very different ways to getting here.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. Like, I think when we were talking earlier, we talked about kind of like the paths to venture capital, and it wasn't intentional, but somehow we got representatively like the traditional investment banking, the STEM skills, and the lawyer, right? In the sense of kind of like the breadth of kind of, you can come at it from so many different angles and so many different paths. And somehow we magically kind of ended up with the three of you kind of representing this like spectrum of backgrounds. That's fantastic. So I think the three of you prove your point that there's not just one path. And I definitely want to, we've had a lot of questions come in, so I definitely kind of want to address a couple of them. A good one, what projects are you looking at around financial inclusion? And have you guys worked on any initiatives that use non-traditional customer data in their credit decisioning processes? Very specific. Financial inclusion, we'll start with financial inclusion projects other than just crypto generally.
I mean, it is just crypto generally.
I was like, I don't want to be that person. And there was a hyper-specific non-traditional customer data. So if that person has ideas, I'm going to say, if you have some thoughts about a project, reach out to these three because you may know something that they don't. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to read. What are some key differentiators of the projects that you invest in? Do they differ from metrics that you'd look at in non-crypto startups? Lucy, you want to take that one?
So I would say yes. When you're looking at a DeFi project versus a company, if you like, you're looking at entirely new metrics. So that's what's so interesting about DeFi is you're looking at how many users are there, what's the network, what's the, GitHub, how much dialogue is there, who's developing the code, how active is it? So you're looking at completely different metrics when you're seeing whether a DeFi project is going to be successful. I mean, I look at it from very early stage, so it's before we've even got to those metrics. It's more at the concept stage. But then, looking at the drivers versus a company, is it revenue generating? It's completely different set of metrics that you're looking at. So I mean, I think the world of crypto has you have to look at meme analysis as well nowadays. The impact of memes, it's just extraordinary. And actually that's now spilling over into traditional stocks and the impact of that. And I see, Robin Hoods of the world, that there are kind of there's some similarities between where players like Robin Hood are going and what we're seeing in crypto and DeFi.
Alana or Sigal, I don't know if you guys want to talk about that at all.
I totally agree with Lucy, and there's so much to learn, right, in DeFi and in crypto in general, but really in DeFi, you really want to, I think, also make sure that you have a strong understanding of what's underlying, where it's going, what's underlying it, where is it going to be, 5, 10, we always think of things from a long-term perspective. What do we think it's going to look like from 10 years from now? How do we differentiate between the different protocols? It's just, it's like lots of different spaces. You have to educate, make sure you have a full understanding and education of what this, complicated technology is doing and what it's capable of. And there are also a lot of people chasing a lot of different things, right? So you want to make sure you're distinguishing between what has real excitement for long-term value versus something that might spike and go down because of a tweet or two. Yeah.
It's funny because go ahead, Alana.
I was going to say the one thing I would add, I agree with Lucy and Sigal. When I reflect on it, I think at the highest level, there's one critical difference, which is that everything that is happening on a blockchain tends to be open source, public. And so from an underwriting perspective, when you're evaluating to investments, there's actually a tremendous amount of data that you can garnish from that. And you can actually review the code down to the technical level if you want to. And so I do think that the investment process itself is quite unique and different relative to, a SaaS startup or something that's not utilizing this concept of open source. And so I actually think that's one of the most exciting things about the space.
So here's an Lucy, did you want to add something?
I think it's a great point.
Yeah, there's a really good question that came in. How has COVID and borders shutting made a difference to all of you when getting to know potential investment projects? And how do you think this will change the funding process going forward?
It's such a great question. I think a lot of firms, right, have made, there's been tons of investment in this space. And I think there are a lot of, a lot of investment firms are making decisions based on Zoom and metrics, as opposed to actually meeting people in person. We're trying to get into the mode of actually meeting people in person, whether it's in the US or elsewhere, because there's just a value, I think, that you have to that kind of the ability to be in the room with somebody for a longer period of time and really get to know them. But we have certainly made investments with people we've never, like everybody else, right? With people we haven't met. And I don't know what long term what this is going to mean, because I think we just place a tremendous amount of value on that in-person kind of conversation, and as we're looking at entrepreneurs. So I think in the long run, that's the model that we'll continue to have, but maybe a little bit more flexibility on the Zoom side as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would just add our expectation going in was tremendous amount of uncertainty, not sure how it was going to work. And what actually transpired was we were incredibly blown away by how much we've been able to accomplish in this decentralized environment where we're all just operating with an internet connection. And so I agree with what Sigal said, that the face-to-face interactions, I think, are so valuable and incredibly important, especially when you're building hopefully lifelong relationships with these entrepreneurs. But I still think it's a bit of a two-sided story here, because really the ability to connect with everybody on the screen today, globally, worldwide, with the click of a button is so powerful too, that I don't think we should lose that post-COVID either.
Lucy, what about you in terms of the impact of COVID or your ability to kind of meet with folks?
Look, I'm looking forward to when it all opens up. And we can have groups and events, and so much happen. And I mean, anyone that's been in the crypto space knows how much deal making goes on at crypto conferences, right? And the networking that goes on is just incredible, and getting sort of exposure to so many new ideas at once in a room. You can't really recreate that energy. So I mean, I personally am working with people that I've known before COVID, and startups that I've known through my PwC days, and just through being in Hong Kong. Actually, in Hong Kong, it's pretty okay. We can meet, and it's just not the big events in crypto conferences, which really so much happens, right? And in like Cyberport, we've got these big accelerators, and it'd be nice to have all that energy back. But it hasn't stopped anything. As always, you just adapt. Yeah, hopefully the old world comes back again.
I'm curious, do you find if it's facilitated anything? Because I feel like when we were forced to go to teleconferencing and Zoom, I mean, Lucy, you and I have had like video chats where I wasn't in Hong Kong. We literally kind of like met over LinkedIn. And I wonder if life hadn't kind of forced, like it kind of made everything a little closer in some ways. And I wonder if the pandemic is going to facilitate relationships even more because of the availability of instant Zooming and teleconferencing that you couldn't do if you were halfway around the world from each other, right? I mean, we're literally all sitting around a Zoom. You're in Hong Kong, they're on the West Coast, I'm in DC. And I don't know, there's a part of me that thinks that this has made the world very small, and crypto is a community that was already pretty tight. And so I'm wondering if there will be this kind of like contraction and expansion, right? Where we kind of all went in, but we kind of clung together. And then when we get out, we'll all just be so excited to see each other at these conferences. But like, did it do some good in terms of bringing the world closer together, video conferencing wise, before life, quote, goes to the new normal? Do you know what I'm getting at, kind of?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn was like a lifeline for all of us at the beginning, and everyone started using it so much more in a much more meaningful way, I would say, to actually develop proper relationships. And Amanda, we definitely met that way, and there have been other relationships that I've struck up in that way that have just it really has push the boundary of what's possible with technology, because we've all had to rely on it so much. So I don't think that will that will go away. Actually, I think we're going to get an even better combination of, in person and also just the connectivity globally as well, and what's possible. But these Zoom calls, it's not even just connecting people around the world. Every meeting that I have in Hong Kong now, and we can meet people, it's kind of fine. It's like, do you want to meet in person or Zoom? Like, it's not, it used to just be meet for coffee or lunch or drinks, and that was it. There was never, the Zoom was not an option. And now I think about it, every single time I reach out, and it's not because there are any restrictions. It's like, do you want to Zoom or do you want to grab a coffee?
It's because now it's pajamas optional. And who wants to give that up? Do any of us want to give that up? No, we're about to go network in Gathertown. And let's be honest, who's wearing pajama pants? Don't lie. Come on, be honest.
I'm just beginning my day, so.
2 participants raised their hands with me. I love you too. Okay, so
No, that's not happening.
No, Sigal, you don't do pajama pants. Lucy, I feel like Alana is my spirit animal in pajama pants, and the two of us will be honest together. But listen, I just want to thank all of you. I loved the whole conversation. Great questions from everyone out there. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone, but I hope you guys will all join us. The link to Gathertown is in the chat, so please make sure you copy it and then paste it into your browser. Sigal can tell you from one of our previous events, it's very fun. It's basically really like Legend of Zelda meets networking, and I'm aging myself with that reference. But trust me, if you can come by for a little bit, I know it's probably crazy times for everyone, but have breakfast with us, have a little lunch with us, have a little dinner, bring a drink if it's not drinking at breakfast, but we won't judge if you are. Okay, so join us in the networking room. Alana, Lucy, Sigal, thank you so much. This was fantastic. We really appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks so much.
This was fun.
Thanks all.